there is no perfect publicly available database. So my plea is, can we work on that? If we want radical transparency in the food system, let's get a food labeling database that we can all refer to and share across the administration.
Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of FDA Watch. I'm Wayne Pines. I've been involved with FDA for several decades. I've authored or edited 16 books about the agency.
And I'm Shelly Garg, and I'm the managing partner and founder of Garg Law, a full-service FDA-focused law firm. I have been on the private side advising companies on regulatory compliance and enforcement for the last 15 years.
And by now, if you've been listening to FDA Watch for the last several episodes, we're an independent, nonpartisan national forum for discussing the latest developments, trends, and issues surrounding FDA.
And if you haven't subscribed yet, do so today at fdawatch.net. You'll be the first to receive an email when a new episode drops, including bonus episodes when there's breaking news. Plus, you'll get access to our headlines and resource links, as well as some background about our guests.
In this episode, we're going to focus on food, dyes, food labeling, nutrition. We have two fabulous guests to help us discuss these very important topics. We'll meet them in just a moment, but first, let's get to some headlines. Of course, the biggest headline this month is the arrival of the new FDA Commissioner, Dr. Makary. Everyone is looking forward to his positioning on a number of issues. We're going to track that very, very closely on FDA Watch. What's also noteworthy is that as the return to work order was implemented, requiring FDA employees to report to an office, the Centers for Drug and for Biologics Evaluation continue to seek to conduct business as usual. Drugs and biologics continue to be reviewed in a timely way. The PDUFA dates seem to be being met. There have been many disruptions in the way that people have to come to work. There's not enough parking spots at White Oak. We'll be tracking how the agency reviews and the oversight process as we move forward. Same thing applies in the devices area. On the device side, the work is also continuing. Just for example, CDRH has been busy with a lot of device recalls. 2 were recently classified as Class 1, the most serious types. It's encouraging for those of us who used to work at FDA to see the agency seeking to conduct as much business as usual, despite the significant disruptions that occurred in January with the termination of as many 200 employees who were on probation at CDRH and with a lot of other employees. I know our guests today are going to be talking about that. We're going to ask them about that. It's a major change in the way that FDA has to do business. Many of the employees who were terminated have returned to work. They're adjusting to working in the office rather than remotely. But what has been very, very encouraging is that the FDA employees continue to show their dedication and their commitment.
Thanks, Wayne. From the Foods Desk, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy directs the FDA to explore rulemaking to eliminate the pathway for companies to self-affirm that food ingredients are safe. Secretary Kennedy is looking to have FDA revise its final rule relating to substances generally recognized as safe, also known as GRAS, and related guidance to eliminate the self-affirmed GRAS pathway. This obviously could have pretty significant implications, and we'll be learning more on the agency's plans in the coming weeks and months. For now, in this episode, spoiler alert, we'll see what our guests have to say about this. From the Cosmetics Desk, PCPC applauds the reintroduction of the Humane Cosmetics Act. The Personal Care Products Council President and CEO Thomas F. Myers praised the Humane Cosmetics Act, which was reintroduced in late February in the U.S. House of Representatives. The leading trade organization said that they applaud the significant bipartisan effort that sets the stage for eliminating new cosmetics animal testing in favor of innovative, scientifically advanced safety assessments. This reintroduction builds on the decades-long effort to promote non-animal alternatives and move closer to eliminating the need for animals in product safety testing. The bill was originally introduced to Congress in 2023. With its return, we'll of course keep an eye on the bill as it makes its way through the legislature. Now, Wayne, let's meet our guest.
Joining us today is Dr. Susan Mayne. Susan has been a powerful voice and a leader in the food regulatory community for some time. She's currently an adjunct professor at the Yale School of Public Health, but from 2015 to 2023, she was the director of the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition at FDA. And before joining FDA, she spent nearly 3 decades at the Yale School of Public Health, focusing on food and nutrition. Welcome to FDA Watch, Susan. Great to have you here.
It's great to be here, Wayne.
Also joining us today is Dr. Peter Lurie. Peter is president of the Center for Science and the Public Interest. CSPI publishes a newsletter, Nutrition Action, and conducts advocacy on Capitol Hill and the regulatory agencies in the courts, at the state and local level, and through corporate campaigns. Previously, Lurie was a senior official at FDA. We're pleased to have you. Peter, thanks for joining, and welcome to FDA Watch.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start out with a question. We have a new commissioner, Dr. Marty Makary from Johns Hopkins. Let me ask both of you, if you had Dr. Makary's ear, what would you ask him to do in the food area as we're moving forward? What needs to be changed? What should remain the same? What needs to be reinforced? Let me start with you, Susan. I know you've published a lot on this subject, so maybe you can summarize your views on that, and then turn to Peter.
Thanks, Wayne. I think the first bit of advice I would give Dr. Makary is to really take stock of everything the Human Foods Program is tasked with doing. Because I think very few people understand the enormous breadth and how there's so many different initiatives underway. And so understand what the program is doing, how they execute that, and learn about the resources and the FTEs that are available, how many people that is, full-time equivalent people, to manage the portfolio of work. And one of the things we learned is we did some of the comparative analyses around the foods program versus other parts of the FDA. It becomes quite clear that the Human Foods Program is very much under-resourced compared to the other parts of the FDA. And that's true across the board. And so I think he will quickly learn that resources are very, very limited in the foods program. There aren't enough staff to do everything that consumers expect the FDA Foods Program to do. And so I really hope he'll look at those issues and stop the cuts, stop the buyouts, all of the issues that I think are going to do significant damage to the Human Foods Program in the short and potentially the long term as well.
Peter?
Well, I guess the first thing I'd remind Dr. Makary is that there's an F in FDA, and that obviously is food. And it's very often made secondary to drugs, devices, biologics, and so forth. He's got a secretary who's especially interested in food, so I would advise him to take a good look at it, because that's probably where a lot of the action is going to be. The second thing that I would urge him to do, and I'm not accusing him of this, although I might accuse others in the current administration of it, is FDA employees are not the enemy. FDA employees are your friend. They are there to help. They are committed people with high degrees of training who see the mission of FDA and wish to fulfill it. They are not some deep, dark state that is out to undermine one, but rather a group that is trying to help, and they have a distinguished career in doing just that. And then, on substantive grounds, and we will doubtless get to this more, I'd point to sodium, and I'd point to sodium as the first thing to do, in as much as it's probably the single largest contributor to morbidity and mortality from our diets in this country. So I would start there. And that is not something that has at all been a focus for the secretary so far. And so that would be a big contribution.
Let me just ask both of you as a quick follow-up. How confident are you that the FDA will get these messages, or the new leadership will get these messages and what can the industry or others do to make sure that the kind of points that you were making are really communicated? Susan, let me start with you and then Peter.
I'm sure Dr. Makary is going to be asking for briefings on all of the work that's in the pipelines and what people are doing and what they've been prioritizing and why. He's obviously a very smart, medically trained individual. So I'm sure he's going to be briefed on a lot of that work. And that's standard during transitions, is to really inform the commissioners of the ongoing work and then let the commissioners weigh in on which things they really want to streamline, move forward, prioritize. And so the centers will have done that prioritization, and then they need to essentially share that with the commissioner. So that will be happening. At the same time, I'm quite certain that there will be a lot of industry communications to the commissioner as well. I'm sure we'll talk about this on the podcast today, but industry has a lot of very significant concerns about so many of the requests for reformulation and what the impact of that is going to be on supply chains and what are the impacts going to be on food prices. So I know the industry is going to be making sure that their perspective on all of these regulatory issues is going to be made clear.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I guess I put it together in one package, which is called science. And that is something that should matter to advocates. It should matter to people in the agency. It should matter to people in the department. It should matter to industry as well. That has to be the clarion call here. And we've certainly heard a number of ideas, especially in the food space, that could generously be characterized as departing from prevailing science. Um, and if Dr. Makary can bring folks back to earth, listen to what the FDA employees have to say on the science because they know, I think we'll all be a lot better off.
Let me turn to one specific topic, and that is red dye number 3. Got a lot of publicity when FDA announced a ban on it. Peter, let me start with you. How does FDA determine the safety of food dyes, and why did it take FDA so long to ban red number 3? Was that an issue when you were there?
Well, there was an advisory committee. I think Susan will probably confirm around the time that I was there. But my personal work on this actually literally dates back 4 decades. And we filed a petition back in the mid 80s trying to ban some of these dyes. There's sort of 2 different issues here, and they shouldn't be conflated. One is the issues around safety as a general matter, which here might include behavioral issues. And a second is cancer. And it's the latter that ultimately was the downfall of red number 3. And it's a lot clearer. The Delaney clause to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act makes quite clear that no chemical should be added to the food supply if it causes cancer in humans or animals. And indeed, at the request of FDA, companies did a study in rodents, and the study in rats in particular turned out to show cancers. And that really might have been the end of the story right there. In fact, back in 1990, FDA put a ban on the use of Red 3 in cosmetics and in topical drugs, and promised at that time that it would remove the remaining uses shortly thereafter, which is to say, dietary supplements, ingested drugs, and foods. But it never got around to that. I expect that a certain amount of pressure was placed on it by the companies who raised a series of scientific issues, I suppose one might generously call them. At the end of the day, after we filed a petition in 2022, I think that the agency kind of saw the writing on the wall, in that the Delaney clause is remarkably clear on this question. Moreover, we had passed a bill out in California that banned red dye number 3 as well. And I think the companies were no longer interested in having a kind of bifurcated market in which you could have red dye number 3 in 49 states, but not in the 50th. And so that, in the end, I think, led to FDA doing what we think the law had always required.
Thanks, Peter. Susan, following up on that, consumers are communicating concerns about food dyes more broadly. Can you talk about, how the FDA balances public health concerns with the interests of the food industry when regulating artificial additives like food dyes? How big of an issue is this? And how do you see this issue evolving in the new administration?
So thanks, Shelly. I think, how the agency sees it is first do good science. And so the agency is going to consider potential actions on any food ingredient, including food colors and other food additives, based upon prioritization and risk characterization. And in part, that explains why the agency had not taken action on Red 3 for many years. And the reason is the agency did not conclude that there was a public health risk associated with consumption of Red 3 at the levels in the U.S. diet. And
Sure.
just to point out, even the science about the cancer risk in rodents is controversial. And that's because they were not real cancers. These were non-malignant tumors that developed in the thyroid gland of male rats when they get 4% of their diet is Red 3.
Sure.
So they're non-malignant tumors, and they're formed by a mechanism that doesn't apply in humans at all. So toxicologists typically would not consider that endpoint as indicative of carcinogenicity. So even the endpoint itself is controversial. But given the citizens' petition and given that it was invoking Delaney, the agency went ahead after I departed and made the determination that they were going to remove Red 3 based on Delaney. But at the same time, they were very clear that this was not a safety-based action, that there was no public health risk. It's an administrative action that they had to take based upon a law that was passed decades ago and that does not reflect current science. So I think that really explains the prioritization. To your question, Shelly, what is the agency doing? They're prioritizing the food ingredients that they have potential concerns about. They've been very transparent about that. They published a list of many of the ingredients that were under review. Some of those were under review because of citizens' petitions that came in that obligate the agency to look at some of these issues. But some of them were under review because the agency has potential safety concerns. And so it's prioritization. So what happens is the workload is so great at the FDA that if you're taking action on something that's not causing a public health risk, that may mean that you're not able to take action on something that is. And so that's what always happens at the FDA. It's prioritization based upon risk, take action where the greatest public health impact can be achieved. And that's how FDA thinks about things in the food ingredient space.
Thanks, Susan. Just kind of piggybacking off of that, just recently, the state of Virginia has banned food additives sort of across the board, Red 3, Red 40, Yellow 5, Yellow 6, Blue 1, Blue 2, et cetera. I mean, can you comment on sort of how states are um, taking it upon themselves to go above and beyond where FDA's current positioning is on food dyes and sort of, if you characterize it as taking the lead in this discussion? I mean, what are your thoughts on I guess this recent state ban and its implications on any future FDA action?
So I'll jump in and then Peter can add. But yes, we are seeing a proliferation of state legislation that's attempting to ban food colors, other ingredients, BHA, propylparaben, a number of different ingredients. And it's going to create a bit of a chaotic situation for the food industry because it's not one consistent set of ingredients that are being considered across the country. So it's really going to be a bit of a chaos situation for the industry to manage. And what's happening is they're really being based upon what consumers are seeking and not based on evidence of harm and clear evidence of harm.
Hmm.
And Peter alluded to this. FDA studied this issue of food colors and how that may potentially affect behavior in children. It's something we took to an external advisory committee of scientists who agreed with the FDA's position, that there wasn't clear evidence of behavioral effects, especially attributed to individual colors. There's all kinds of potential for confounding when kids are eating products that have a bunch of different colors in them. They also have sugar and a whole bunch of other things in them. And if you see behavioral issues, how do you know that it's attributable to
Yeah.
something like Red 3? So it is going to create some chaos. What I'm hearing from the industry are also very significant concerns about things like supply chains. So if Red 3 and Red 40 are taken out, they need to find replacements. There's a couple of different replacements that could be used for Red 3 and Red 40. Things like carmine is one that has been used. Beet juice is another one. And there's also an extract from sweet potatoes, purple sweet potatoes, but there certainly is not enough of that in availability
chain,
right now.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
to meet those needs. So that's going to be a challenge for industry.
Yeah, yeah. The next question is a four-parter for both of you. Peter, we'll start with you, but Susan, please feel free to jump in. I'd like to talk about FDA's final rule to update the healthy claim that manufacturers can voluntarily use on food packages. What prompted the FDA to create the healthy claim final rule? Can you explain the key provisions of the final rule and how they change the way food products can be labeled as healthy? FDA also issued a proposed rule on front of package nutrition labeling that can help consumers quickly and easily identify how foods can be part of a healthy diet. We'd love to hear how the principles behind FOP labeling and how it differs from traditional nutrition information on the back of packaging, and also the priorities that led FDA to issue both of these rules and how they interact with each other.
Okay, well, if you don't mind, I'm just going to rewind slightly just to respond to a couple things that Susan
Sure.
said. And I'll be brief, and then I'll answer your question, I promise. Just to say that whatever one makes of the carcinogenicity data, it does seem like FDA agreed at the end of the day that by law they needed to ban these. And in fact, they seem to think so back in 1990. So I'm not quite sure what made them sure enough to ban it back in 1990, but then all these other decades went by in between. So there's that. And with respect to the state thing, which I think is important, listen, I worked at FDA, and I know that the best place for decisions on food dyes and the like to be made is at FDA. But frankly, we got frustrated. We
Right.
felt that we were submitting these petitions; they weren't being acted upon. Other countries were banning them in some instances, which doesn't prove that they should be banned, but certainly raises your index of suspicion. And so we,
Mhm.
we started to get frustrated, and so we turned to the states. And if the FDA can get its act together and act more expeditiously on these things and more protectively, then I don't expect we'll keep doing that. That
Yeah.
would be fine with us. Now, back to the labeling, though. So these are two very interesting rules, in part because they're almost flip sides of each other. So the healthy rule, it should be understood, is really a voluntary rule, right? It basically says if you wish to slap the word healthy on your product, on the side of it, in front of it, what have you, if you want to use that word, it has to meet a certain definition that FDA will set forth. And FDA has had a definition. It goes back a decade or two, and it was felt to be out of date, in part because it focused on total fat, for example, and a lot on certain micronutrients, which were not probably the most important part of what defines something as healthy in modern America, where very few people have micronutrient deficiencies. And so FDA, sensibly enough, set about a process to redefine this. And in the end, they did. And I think that it's an improved definition. It's clearer. It focuses more on food groups and the most important nutrients, not on micronutrients. It tries to clamp down on people using healthy as a health halo to make otherwise unhealthy products actually appear healthy. So I think that that's really progress. The problem with it, though, is it's voluntary. And what that means is that when it's in place, and it should be said that the current administration has delayed its implementation for a little while. We'll see if that turns out to be important or not. It's a bit early to know. Susan may have some speculation on that. But, if you were, after it was in place, to go into a supermarket and pick up a product that didn't say healthy, there are one of two possibilities. The one possibility is that, well, it really isn't. It didn't meet FDA's sensible definition. Or the alternative is that a company just decided not to avail itself of healthy, that it decided to use something else, natural, good for you, nutritious, whatever it is that they thought their polling told them would be better than healthy. So you're really left with that as a problem. So I do think it's a step forward, and I'd like to see it go into place, but it will
Mhm.
always have a limitation. Now, the front of pack, though, in a way, like I said, is the flip side of it. So whereas the healthy is voluntary, the front of pack is mandatory. So that's going to be a standardized thing that one can find in a similar location on all products. It will focus on the three main nutrients: sodium, added sugars, and saturated fat. And it will tell you, after rigorous study by the FDA in randomized trials, that a product is high or medium, or for that matter, low, in any of uh, any of those three particular nutrients, and you'll be able to tell that on every product. So it's not just that it conveys a sort of a grand approach to the product the way healthy does. It's the totality of the food, really. This focuses in on the nutrients because that's FDA's assessment of where its authority lies, and we agree with it. And it will be interpretive. The evidence for it is I think pretty good. There's certainly from around the world, there's evidence that these kinds of products have had two benefits. One, that people who see them tend to choose products that are healthier, knowing to avoid any of these nutrients that are too high. And the second, at least in Chile, there is evidence that the companies have reformulated to reduce the amount of added sugars in their products. And at the end of the day, that is probably more likely to have a big effect upon the American diet than the individual choices of consumers. So we're enthusiastic about it. It's in the proposed rule stage. We haven't heard much from the secretary or from the FDA commissioner about front of pack, but to my ears at least, this is something like healthy that ought to be at home, even in a Republican administration, even in a Maham administration, because at the end of the day, what is happening is that people are being provided with information such that they can act as rational actors in the marketplace. And there's nothing more Republican than that.
Thanks, Peter. Susan, I'll turn that to you to see if you have any
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah, a couple things. Just to highlight the real importance of the front of pack labeling as compared to what's on the nutrition facts label. People say, well, they're just taking the information on the back and putting it on the front. Well, not really. And
Hmm.
one of the key differences is that it is interpretive, and the back of the pack has daily values. But what the front of pack would have is high, medium, or low in the
Right.
three nutrients of public health concern: sodium, saturated fat, added sugars. And that's really important. It's easily accessible when you're shopping. You don't have to spin labels around or search for it. It's right on the front of the pack if that rule was finalized. The other key thing about the differences between healthy versus the front of pack is obviously front of pack is mandatory, as Peter said, which also means that it's compelled speech. So that's going to be where First Amendment is really going to kick in. And so the FDA had to have an extremely strong scientific evidentiary basis to mandate speech on the front of these packages. And I think it really highlights the strength of the science on those three nutrients of public health concern.
Yeah.
One comment I am a little bit concerned about with the incoming administration is I'm seeing some pushback on saturated fat as potentially not being important as a nutrient of concern. We've seen things about promotion of things like beef tallow and
Hmm.
some stigmatizing of seed oils, which is really against the science. Just for reference, a tablespoon of beef tallow is about, 25 to a third of your daily allotment for saturated fat, 1 tablespoon. So that would, if it was going to be in products, that would be, bearing that information on the saturated fat content in an interpretive way that would help inform consumers. So a few comments on front of pack. Healthy, I'm very supportive of. I helped lead that work when I was at FDA. So important to really incentivize industry to work more fruits and vegetables and whole
Yep.
grains and things into the foods. If they don't have a meaningful amount of, let's say, fruits or vegetables, along with limiting sodium, saturated fat, and added sugars, they would not qualify for the claim. And that's really to address these concerns we kept seeing where people would say, well, there's images of fruits on the front of the package, but it's a trivial amount.
Right.
So in order to bear that claim, healthy really has strict criteria. And the other thing FDA has been working on is a symbol for healthy based upon consumer research that could be found on the front of those packages that really could indicate this product meets FDA's strict criteria for a healthy food in terms of building healthy dietary patterns. So both of those initiatives I was very strongly supportive of to help empower consumers.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. And I really sincerely appreciate your comments on both of these topics. I think as a practitioner in this space, I have been frustrated with, companies trying to use imagery for fruits or vegetables and having artificial flavoring, in their ingredient deck or front of pack. So I do think also that designations like healthy will more readily allow consumers to have access to information and to be informed in making choices that best meet their lifestyle. We're going to take a quick break right now, but don't go anywhere because we'll be right back.
And we're back. We're talking about foods and dyes and food labeling and nutrition with Susan Mayne and Peter Lurie. Shelly?
Let's start with you this time around, Susan. FDA has been working with the food industry to reduce sodium in processed, packaged, and prepared foods through phase one and phase two guidance, draft guidance, and overarching goals. Considering the overwhelming evidence that sodium is an important determinant of chronic disease risk, can you comment on the steps that FDA has taken to reduce sodium in food products? Are FDA's efforts sufficient, or should the agency be doing more?
Thanks, Shelley. It's a complicated topic because consumer preferences can be determined by things like sodium content in food. And so what the research has shown is that if you lower the amount of sodium in the food supply very gradually and incrementally, consumer palates can adjust and they won't even know it. And so that's a key point that's been shown in research. And so what the FDA strategy has been focused on is really leveling the playing field across the food supply, getting all food products to start gradually, incrementally reducing the amount of sodium. So that would benefit consumer health without impacting sales and consumer preference and those types of issues around these products. So that's the approach FDA used. It was a data-driven approach where they looked at 160 different categories of foods and said, what do we see in terms of sodium content? And we would see things like, a slice of bread could have 100 milligrams of sodium or 500 milligrams of sodium. And you may say, well, does a slice of bread really need 500 milligrams of sodium? Or can we get these folks to start reducing sodium gradually? So it was a data-driven approach. A lot of input from the industry was published as draft targets first. Industry could submit data and information and say, well, this particular cheese, it's really hard for us to reduce for the following reasons. And FDA took all of that information into account. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach for the food industry. It's very targeted. So phase one targets, the industry was given a specific amount of time. I think it was about 2.5 years to meet those targets. The data are not yet out for the full 2.5 years because it's actually complicated to measure the changes in the food supply using things like food ingredient labeling databases. But what the data are showing is that reductions are being made. Of course, we had the challenge during COVID that the food industry was very focused in on simply supply chains and getting food to customers. But at the same time, even during that interval of time, progress has been made. It's been better in the packaged food industry than it was in the restaurant industry. And there's an obvious explanation for that. And that is that the restaurant industry needs to have lower sodium ingredients for them to make their products lower in sodium. So the tomato sauce they buy or the dough that they buy or the cheese they buy, it needs to be lower in sodium for their end products to also be lower in sodium. So progress is being made. More needs to be done. The best data we have available from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey indicate that we're pretty much trending the way FDA planned based upon the intakes in phase one, but more needs to be done. And I agree with Peter. It is one of the most important things FDA can do to reduce chronic disease risk.
Thanks, Susan. Peter, your comments?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with practically everything there, and certainly, especially the last point about how important this really is. Where we are at the moment is that FDA has finalized what turned out to be a 2.5-year target. They have published what would be a 5.5-year target and accepted comments on those at the moment. Once upon a time, there was a 10-year target that I think has probably vanished for now. So much time has passed that they probably have to reanalyze for the 10-year targets and repropose and so forth. So for now, finalizing the 5.5-year target would be a very important thing to do. And we have petitions before the agency that would try to accomplish that. The one area where I do disagree a little bit with Susan, and there aren't many of those things you will have noticed on this call, is that we actually did, and I don't know if she's had a chance to look at it, but we published just yesterday in the JAMA our own assessment of FDA's data on the sodium content of foods. And we came up with a rather less favorable analysis than FDA did. So what FDA did was it looked at these 160 categories that Susan mentioned, and it looked at the fraction that were going up and the fraction that were going down and the fraction that stayed more or less the same. And it concluded that more were going down than up, which would be what you'd like to see. We looked at it, I think, a little bit more carefully than that, in that we didn't look only at whether it was up or down, but by how much it was going up or down. And when we did that, we found that overall, the sort of net effect was a very, very limited decrease, as Susan says, more so in packaged foods than in restaurants. So we're a little bit disappointed. All of us would like to see more. It is true, as Susan hints, that it was a kind of an imperfect take on whether or not the agency's efforts to date are effective, in as much as the baseline was back in 2010, long before FDA even proposed the 2-year target. And the final date was in 2022, I believe, before the 2-year target was scheduled to take effect. So the period itself is kind of imperfect. So we're not by any means writing this off. But we were disappointed with what we found when we looked at it more carefully.
And can I just respond to that? Because I think it highlights a different issue for me, and that is the kind of public health surveillance and data systems that we need to really evaluate progress in the food supply. And one of my wishes for the incoming administration is to really emphasize the importance of transparency in the food supply by supporting publicly available labeling databases on what is happening in the U.S. food supply. They don't exist today. And so what FDA had to do is really, in some cases, purchase individual data and really try to estimate what is happening in the U.S. food supply, which considered things like the amount of production as well as the market share of the product. So they did as sophisticated as an analysis as can be done, but recognizing that there is no perfect publicly available database. So my plea is, can we work on that? If we want radical transparency in the food system, let's get a food labeling database that we can all refer to and share across the administration.
I mean, I'd certainly agree, and I'd go a little bit beyond that, just to say, can we please have enough people at FDA to get this work done? I mean, I think that Susan, at least now, would be happy to say that, we don't have enough people in the additives division. We don't have enough people in the supplements division. We don't have enough people to do as many inspections as FDA would like to do. And the cure for that, most certainly, is not erratic, inconsistent, confusing, across the board cuts in agencies. That is not how you solve any of those problems. In fact, that's probably how you make them worse. So again, the staffing cuts so far are absolutely antithetical to what it is that this so-called MAHA movement says it believes in. You can't get done what the secretary would like to get done with a workforce that is shrinking.
Yeah, and I'd like to add one comment to that is the FDA Foods Program just went through this massive reorganization, the Human Foods Program, and they said, what structure do we need to really be optimally efficient for the future? And that included some mandates from Congress, such as establishing an Office of Critical Foods to really oversee infant formula and medical foods, which FDA didn't have an office like that before. We had a staff of a handful of people. And so here you've got this wonderful reorg that people spent a lot of time and effort, and now we have positions that remain unfilled, and they're under a hiring freeze. And one of those positions is the director of the Office of Critical Foods. And so we know infant formula is a priority for the administration. Can they please hire a director to help oversee that office? So it's not just not losing people, but it's the ability to make the targeted hires that have been identified as the reorganization of the Human Foods Program at FDA.
Yeah, the discussion of sodium brings back memories for me. Before any of you were at FDA, I was there, and we had a major sodium reduction program and a national sodium education program. I think it was the very first national sodium education program. I've written quite a bit about that because we started it actually in the Reagan administration. And so here we are many decades later, still talking about sodium reduction, still talking about the need to educate the public about sodium and its role in the food supply. Some of these issues just don't seem to ever go away. I just want to come back for a second to staffing, especially with regard to Susan, because you headed CIFSAN for such a long time. And I think we all agree that reductions in the food staff that in the human foods program would not be favorable, but beyond that would undermine the efforts by this administration to do what they want to do in the food area. Susan, any more perspective on that?
Yeah, and I think one thing I wanted to mention is that the foods program is somewhat unique in the sense that they don't have user fees to support those folks. So 99% of the folks are funded by appropriated dollars from Congress. And we have tried to get user fees for some of the work that's being done at FDA, for example, in the food additives program. I worked with previous administrations to get user fees into the president's budget, but we found no support from Congress at the time to really try to get industry to help cover some of the costs. So without user fees, the program is very dependent on appropriated dollars. And with new asks for more work to be done in the food additive space, that's going to require additional resources because that team is very busy right now, flat out, and really does not have the bandwidth to take on a lot of new activity without new hires.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Wayne. And finally, as we noted in the headline segment at the top of the episode, HHS Secretary Kennedy has directed FDA to explore rulemaking to eliminate the pathway for companies to self-affirm food ingredients that are safe. What are your thoughts in response to FDA's announcement that the agency is seeking to eliminate the self-affirmed GRAS pathway to enhance FDA's oversight of ingredients considered to be safe? Peter, let's start with you.
So, just for listeners, the GRAS program it does what you said, which is it allows a company to, in a completely non-transparent fashion, decide for itself that a given ingredient is safe, and then to add it to the food supply without even notifying FDA. I mean, that is extraordinary. It is certainly not what the average American's understanding of the way the food supply works is,
Right.
and I don't think it's what they want, quite honestly.
Yeah.
So, the agency has been stuck. We tried to close that so-called GRAS loophole by suing the agency, and we lost. So it's exciting to see somebody who is interested in this again. And I think that we're going to have to look at it in a number of different ways. One is, what is it that would close the GRAS loophole voluntarily? I mean, the companies that purportedly have all of this safety data on hand, on the basis of which they were able to satisfy themselves that the product was safe. Why can't they make those public voluntarily? That would be a start. I think that there are some regulatory changes that FDA could make, in particular to a 1997 guidance that they passed that I think facilitated the industry's use of what we call secret GRAS. And then much could be clarified if there was legislation that would close the gap completely. So I think there's much to be done. It's extraordinary to see an otherwise anti-regulatory administration show interest in this. But that also tells me that there may come a time when it becomes difficult to actually push it through. That folks at OMB in particular, and in general, the anti-regulatory fervor that seems to have seized the current administration will make it very difficult to close that loophole. And you can be sure that industry will be there in full force to resist as well. So it's a good idea. The details are complicated, and there's a long way to go.
And I'll react to a few things there. FDA has always encouraged industry to notify FDA when they do a GRAS determination. They've put out best practices for doing a GRAS determination, what type of expertise do you need, et cetera. So I think they've tried to work within the constraints of the current program. But I agree with Peter that consumers really would like to know that all food ingredients are going through the FDA. So the concept is very appealing. I think the challenge comes in the implementation. And more specifically, if you think about all the ingredients that have potentially been done through a self-affirmation process, turning all of that information over to a staff that is going to need more people is going to be daunting. And thinking about timelines, how much time would they have to have? Could they use consultants to help summarize all of the information? They want to review all the toxicology data, all the risk assessment, all of that information. That takes people. And so if they really want to make this as a mandatory notification, they've got to come up with the resources. The worst thing possible would be to make it mandatory and then not resource it. And that's going to completely stymie the food industry in their ability to even manufacture the foods that we have today. Not to say anything about innovation. So that is a big concern. The other issue that I will raise is the food industry has repeatedly said that all of these things are going to be adding costs. If they start dropping some of these products, rather than say, we're not going to go through this GRAS process, we'll just stop using those ingredients, that means reformulation. And every time industry does reformulation, that can potentially add to their costs. And they are very concerned about absorbing those costs and then raising food prices for consumers, which we know is something the administration has pledged not to do. So that's a big issue, the issues of supply chains and costs. And I support reformulation where there's public health gain. And I really hope that industry will be focused in on sodium and not some minor ingredients that may be, legislated out of existence in one particular state. I'm concerned that we may have public health losses if reformulation is done for things that don't matter than the things that really do matter, like sodium and added sugars.
Yeah, I would agree that there's been a certain kind of demonization of additives that has been very generalized and not appropriate. The fact is that there may be a number of additives that we could easily live without, like most food dyes, at least the synthetic ones. But there are some very important additives that do things that we really appreciate, like extended shelf life or preventing bacterial overgrowth, for example. And it will be a very sad day if, in some very crude way, some product that is, let us say, keeping the product, some additive that is keeping the product free of a bacteria, becomes infected, and we have an outbreak associated with that. That will be a very bad day. So I agree with Susan. Not all additives are created equal. It's reasonable to have a regulatory approach for all of them, perhaps in some tiered way related to risk, but they need to be assessed one by one, and can't be excluded in some kind of general way with a statement of poisoning our children or some such phrase. That just isn't helpful.
On that note, we're going to turn briefly to our resource link segment, where we provide you with some valuable links that you may want to check out. So, Shelly, let's share them with our audience right now.
Will do, but I'd like to first point out that these links will be included on our website, fdawatch.net, so there is no need to write anything down.
Let's look first at our pharma and medical device resource links. We have combined the pharma and device links here. We have 2 links for one deal. Both links come from the Guardian newspaper. And I would just summarize it by saying that a professor at the University of Nottingham, Roger Baisden, who's a microbiologist with a 50-plus year career at various hospitals, wrote a letter to the Guardian where he cited an English author, Alexander Master's views on why so many drugs and treatments fail to make it to market. And the reason that he cited is that scientists run out of cash. And he paraphrased Master's March 11th Guardian piece by saying, failure to move new medicines to commercial and therefore clinical use results is a vast waste of research resources and of loss of valuable treatments because most never leave the lab. Baisden also cited regulatory approval, although it's essential. What he said was it's out of date, too costly, and not suited to modern innovations. This resource link applies both to drugs and devices, and we've included links to both the Baisden and the Masters articles at fdawatch.net, and we encourage you to check them out.
Thanks, Wayne. Let's look at our foods link. From FDA, both the agency and HHS announced Operation Stork Speed to expand options for safe, reliable, and nutritious infant formula for American families. FDA is bringing forth a set of actions and initiatives focused on infant formula, such as beginning the nutrient review process, increasing testing for heavy metals and other contaminants, extending the personal importation policy, and encouraging companies to work with FDA on any questions regarding increased transparency with ingredients and labeling, among other actions. The full list of actions is available on FDA's site, which you can access via our resource link at fdawatch.net. And finally, let's turn to our cosmetics link. Back to our friends at PCPC, the Council just launched a webpage with key information on economic achievements in the cosmetics industry. According to a PCPC press release, the webpage, headlined Beauty That Drive Economic Growth, touts the economic impact and essentiality of the cosmetics and personal care products industry on federal, state, and local economies. The page features shareable, state-specific, and national fact sheets and resources with key economic data such as sales, employment, and manufacturing stats. It's definitely worth checking out if you're one of our listeners in the cosmetic space. Again, this link and all of these links are available at fdawatch.net. And on that note, Wayne, it's time to thank Susan and Peter for really such a fun and engaging discussion and on these very important topics. We'd also like to thank our podcast creator and executive producer, Michael Levin-Epstein, and our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister.
And we will promise on this podcast to continue to monitor the issues that Susan and Peter just mentioned, because they're essential. And if anybody has a good crystal ball as to what's going to happen, just let us know and we'll put the crystal ball right to work. If you want to suggest or be a guest on our show, or you want to be a marketing partner or a sponsor, or just comment, you can contact us at info@fdawatch.net. Info, I-N-F-O, fdawatch.net. Definitely check out our website, fdawatch.net. And finally, we're appreciated if you're so inclined to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does make a difference. And remember to follow us and subscribe. Make sure all your colleagues, your neighbors, your friends, your family, everybody you've ever met, subscribe to the podcast. That's the only way to make sure you won't miss a single episode of FDA Watch.
And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.